Last month's hurricane was something else, wasn't it? My place, for instance, had its roof blown off. It was a disaster. I was safe in the doghouse, so I was totally fine, but it seems like it was rough for those inside the house. I was actually quite elegantly sipping coffee in the doghouse. When I heard this odd noise and looked out, I couldn't help but burst into laughter as the roof got torn off and flew away, bit by bit. My room is actually the doghouse. And when I say doghouse, I mean a pet log cabin with about 50 square feet. Originally, I was told to actually live in the doghouse, but obviously, you can't really live in such an environment, so when they said I could remodel it as I liked, I fully utilized my work skills to build a small, retro-cute cabin. The whole reason I ended up living in a heavily modified doghouse was that my mother-in-law, who I was living with, said, "You're less than a pet, why don't you live with them?" That ticked me off. I thought, well, if that's how it's going to be, I might as well really live in the doghouse. Originally, my mother-in-law and I weren't exactly the best match from the beginning of my marriage. Still, if I kept my visits to my in-laws' home to just Christmas, minimizing contact, I thought I could somehow bear it. However, the real hell started when my father-in-law suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized this spring, and we ended up living together. My mother-in-law was a homemaker with a little chronic illness. She didn't drive, so until then, my father-in-law had been taking her to her weekly medical appointments. But now he was the one who had fallen ill. And he needed a long-term hospital stay. Since it was difficult for my mother-in-law to go to her appointments on her own, we decided to live with her while her husband was hospitalized. Of course, I was opposed to it at first, but around that time, our apartment was scheduled for demolition, and we had to rush to find a new place to live, so my husband pushed through with "It's just until we find a new place to live." And within a month of starting to live together, my mother-in-law showed her true colors. She started nitpicking everything I did. At the worst of times, just walking down the hallway would elicit, "Really, you're so noisy just walking. I was asleep, and you woke me up." She would actually stick her head out of her room just to say that in a snide way. Of course, she was annoying about household chores like cooking and cleaning too. I broke down and cried to my husband after just a week of living together. But he was unfazed. Even when I said, "I really can't do this living together thing. I'm going to find a new place to live by myself," he would say, "My mom's just a bit blunt. She's strict about household stuff because she cares. She's even doing the cooking and laundry, so maybe you're actually finding the living situation helpful, aren't you? It's not that she's doing the chores, she's just complaining about the chores I do and making me redo them with her snide comments." No matter how many times I said that, he wouldn't listen. He was so sweet-talked by his mother that even when she insulted me to my face, he would just laugh it off. Mom, that's a bit harsh." By then, my husband was fully brainwashed by his mother, and there was an atmosphere at home that it was okay to say anything to me. My father-in-law, who was in the hospital, was obviously no help. Just a month into living together, I reached my limit with my mother-in-law. And the reason I started living in the doghouse was because they had a dog. His name was Hercules. He was taken in by my in-laws from relatives who couldn't keep him anymore due to a move or something, and they didn't seem to have much affection for Hercules. The doghouse, just plunked in the corner of the yard, was honestly not the right size for a rather large Hercules, and I had always felt a bit sorry for him whenever I visited. But after spending time at my in-laws, I couldn't stand their rough treatment of Hercules. They fed him, sure, but walks were hit or miss, and of course, they ignored reminders for his regular senior dog checkups. Even as a cat person, I just couldn't stand it. So since coming to my in-laws, I took care of Hercules every day. Walks in the morning and evening, and I took him to the vet. For that, far from being grateful, my mother-in-law was always sneering. "You really do go well together, taking care of that dog. It suits you." That kind of tone. And my husband's reaction was something like, "That dog is so frail and dirty, can't do any tricks, not cute at all, huh?" It almost tore me apart to hear that. Aren't dogs part of the family too? But I guess in my mother-in-law's eyes, Hercules wasn't part of the family, so I resigned myself to his care with a heavy heart. So, when I noticed dirt on Hercules that brushing couldn't remove, I decided to bathe him in the bathroom. But just my luck, I ran into my mother-in-law while carrying Hercules to the bath. She had been calling Hercules filthy and dirty in such a derogatory way. Of course, I yelled at her with all my might. "What are you thinking, bringing such a dirty thing into the house?" "Well, he's dirty, so I thought I'd give him a shampoo." "Huh? Shampoo? You're planning to take him to the bathroom? Isn't the outside hose enough? It might be too cold for him outside, and since Hercules is old, I thought I'd use warm water." "Don't be ridiculous. Washing such a dirty thing inside the house, are you out of your mind?" To think she would say such things about a living being I was sharing a house with, filthy, crazy. Until then, I had mostly kept quiet and let my mother-in-law's sarcasm and attacks slide, but this time I snapped. "If I may say so, the reason Hercules is dirty is because you all didn't take proper care of him, right?" What followed was a stormy argument. In the end, my mother-in-law said, "You and that dog are just burdens, not even fit to be called pets. If you want to be so friendly with him, why don't you both live in the doghouse?" And she threw me out the front door. That's when I snapped and decided, if that's how it's going to be, I'll really live in the doghouse. And that's why I decided to renovate Hercules' doghouse. For the time being, I apologized to Hercules and dismantled his small doghouse to make way for the new one. Luckily, my in-laws' home is in the countryside with plenty of yard space to spare. I stormed into the hardware store, fuming, and started the foundation with the blocks I bought, ending the first day of work. Until the new doghouse was built, I used my car, which I drive to work, as temporary shelter. I had been setting up my car for telework anyway because I hated doing it at my in-laws' home, so I could just about manage to sleep in it with Hercules. For showers, I went to a gym. In the end, I took Hercules to a pet grooming professional a little way out. "He is such a good, well-behaved dog," said the staff, complimenting Hercules, and I couldn't help but tear up. It was right after I had seen Hercules belittled so much by my mother-in-law. My husband said nothing even after I started living in the yard. I bet he was at home saying, "Hey, Mom, seriously, Vicky has started living in the yard." Well, if she's fine with it, I don't mind either, all the while gauging my mother-in-law's reaction. From then on, I continued to renovate Hercules' cabin while living out of my car. After the foundation was done, I started building the base. At first, I thought about using a ready-made kit that just needed assembly, but it all happened too fast, and even with my work connections, I couldn't arrange it immediately, so it was completely custom-made to my needs. I was picky about the flooring too, making sure to use sturdy materials that wouldn't bow underfoot. Actually, I work as an architect. I'm not quite a seasoned carpenter, but I have enough knowledge, and through my job, I could easily get advice like, "I want to build this, how should I do it?" from various people on the sites. I could manage to build a cabin or two. Building the foundation would have required extensive construction, so I couldn't have done it alone. But I was determined to build within the limits that wouldn't require building code inspections. However, I wanted it to be sturdy, so the foundation wasn't just blocks, I put a bit of ingenuity into it. Well, that ingenuity is a trade secret. Thanks to that, it survived the previous typhoon. I couldn't believe it. Everything I did seemed to be seen as some foolish oddity. While I was sweating, cutting wood, and assembling, my mother-in-law came out to the garden with her parasol and laughed, saying, "You're really something, gathering all this junk. Aren't you embarrassed for the neighbors to see?" By then, my husband, perhaps at the peak of his brainwashing, didn't even speak to me anymore. His attitude was as if marrying me was a youthful mistake, a dark chapter of his past. By the way, the neighbors were mostly like, "Oh, you're building something quite impressive. Oh, well, this is something special. Nicely done." The neighbors looked on favorably, but I bet they never imagined I was building a cabin to live in myself. Well, no matter how my mother-in-law and husband reacted, at least they didn't interfere with my work. 2 months into living with my in-laws, and in about half a month, my new home, or rather, Hercules' new abode was complete. It's called a doghouse, but the floor area is about 50 square feet. Just imagine a small log cabin, and that's about the size. That's how I finished it. I used residential-grade materials, so it's well insulated. Powered by a home battery, I could do office work inside the cabin. The bed is just a simple camp bed, but after sleeping in the car for so long, I was moved to tears when I finally lay down on it. Hercules, at first, seemed a bit overwhelmed by the sudden move to a grander home, but it didn't take more than an hour for him to get used to the comfort and start relaxing. 50 square feet. That was the castle for me and Hercules, complete. And the ones who panicked were my mother-in-law and husband. Even though I calculated the size to be unproblematic for the yard, a big cabin now stood boldly. Next to the 30-year-old main house, my cabin looked cleaner and more comfortable at first glance. Well, in reality, I put a lot of effort into making it comfortable, so compared to the neglected main house, my cabin was indeed much nicer. But to my in-laws, whatever I made was just junk. This flimsy thing, kick it and it'll break. Kick it and it'll probably get a hole in it, they would say, and my mother-in-law even tried kicking the outer wall, which of course didn't budge. It was funny to see her kick something hard and then limp away. I decided to play along with my mother-in-law and husband, saying with a smile, "Oh yes, just a playful piece of cardboard construction, so it's nothing for you two to worry about, right?" Then, about a week after me and Hercules started living in the cabin, a record-breaking typhoon emerged. This massive storm caused extensive damage in many areas and hit our town too. By that time, I had a small kitchen set up inside the cabin. Still, I had some doubts about its safety, so I bought emergency supplies, did some final maintenance, and covered the windows and fragile parts to prepare for the typhoon. The folks in the main house, watching me, said, "Must be tough living in a cardboard house. Isn't it going to be blown away by the typhoon?" "You got it. Make sure your junk doesn't fly into our house," they said, doing hardly any preparation themselves. I didn't owe them any concern, so I just quietly made sure our cabin was secured. On the day of the typhoon, as the wind started howling, my husband and mother-in-law were in a panic, shutting the storm windows and making a fuss, while Hercules was taking a cozy nap in the warm room, and I was reading. There's something pleasant about being safe inside while there's chaos outside, like you're in a protected bubble. I was enjoying that feeling to the fullest, stroking the sleeping Hercules, brewing a new cup of coffee, and wondering if the storm would pass by tomorrow. Then came a crunching, tearing noise distinct from the typhoon, followed by my mother-in-law's piercing scream that I could hear inside the cabin. I peered out the window to see what had happened, and the roof of the main house had been spectacularly torn off. It was a disaster. Since the main house was a single-story building, I could only imagine, and almost laugh at, the chaos inside with the roof gone. I pointed and laughed out loud, which I hadn't done in a long time. Even a 30-year-old house can lose its roof. I wondered if there was a structural issue as I continued to enjoy my elegant coffee break. And outside, to the soundtrack of my husband and mother-in-law arguing loudly enough to echo through the neighborhood, I spent the night. The next day, after the storm had passed, I was awakened by the sound of my mother-in-law and husband knocking on the cabin door. They came with a look that could scare off demons, and my husband's final assertion was as follows. "When our house was in trouble, how could you just calmly sleep through it? Don't you have any sense of duty as a wife? You need to vacate this cabin right now, and start fixing that house. You're an architect, you can do it. We will live in this cabin until then." Yeah, it was complete chaos. Even if they told me to vacate, I was kicked out of the house in the first place, and besides, I didn't build this room to accommodate multiple people. I had a lot to say, but I silently went back inside the cabin and took out the divorce papers I had stored on the shelf. Truth be told, just 3 days into living in the cabin, I had calmly realized, this is grounds for a divorce, and I had already prepared the divorce papers then, but I had been struggling to find a new place where I could live with Hercules. Since the cabin could be moved, I had arranged to temporarily place it at the construction firm where I work, as a sort of display piece, but I still didn't have a new home for us. However, I couldn't tolerate what had just happened. "Please divorce me," I said calmly, and my husband looked as if his eyes were about to pop out of his head. Why was he surprised? After all his behavior, why would he be surprised by a divorce proposal? But then, for some reason, he said, "What? Divorce? Why? I won't accept a divorce. We'll go to court, to court. If we're getting a divorce, you'll have to pay alimony." It made no sense to me. The whole alimony thing was completely baffling. In the end, since my husband wouldn't budge, we really did go to mediation, and of course, since our marital relationship was already destroyed, the court quickly granted the divorce. Moreover, since it was considered that my husband had kicked me out, I ended up with a favorable division of property. My husband totally lost out by taking it to court. I would have been willing to split the assets evenly if it hadn't gone that far. So that's the story of how last month I moved to a pet-friendly place with Hercules, and we started living peacefully. I had been uploading videos of building Hercules' cabin to a video-sharing site, and I never thought the final episode would end with the twist: the neighboring in-laws' house blew away, but our doghouse is safe. Thanks to that, I've gotten a lot more requests from wealthy clients who want to build sturdy, luxurious cabins for their dogs, and lately, I've become known as the doghouse architect. And I'm actually more of a cat person. During the divorce proceedings, I heard that the roof of my in-laws' house that blew away in the typhoon ended up damaging the walls of a neighboring house. Instead of properly apologizing, my mother-in-law handled it poorly, and it almost went to court over that too. My husband might have considered our marriage a dark chapter, but for me, the marriage was the black history. Why did I ever marry such a guy? The marriage to my husband was a failure, but I gained a precious family member, and not all experiences were bad. And watching the in-laws' roof fly off was certainly entertaining.